I start or is
She could have shouted from here, right? Why is there a preference for this side of the room? I find this in Nachrani as well. People come and sit on one side. Safety. Safety in numbers.
no, you're saying that leftist leanings.
I'm glad that.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Micah, can you hear me?
Yes.
On behalf of Micah Litcom, I'd like to invite our esteemed guests and authors and our president and director. First, I'd like to make a small brief introduction about the authors and the topic of discussion. So, our first author is Dr. Mallika Sarabhai. She's a recipient of Padma Bhushan. She was born in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, in India in 1954 to Vikram Sarabhai and Mrinalini Sarabhai. She completed her MBA from IIM Ahmedabad in 1974 and doctorate in organizational behavior from Gujarat University in 1976. She is a noted choreographer and dancer and has also acted in a few Hindi and Gujarati films. In 1989, she performed hard-hitting solo theatrical works like Shakti, The Power of Women. After that, she directed and acted in numerous productions reflecting current issues and awareness among people. Our second author is Mr. Anand Neelakantan. He was born in Tirupunithura, Kerala.
Good try.
Almost.
Sorry for pronunciation. Mr. Anand Neelakantan grew in a village of old world charm and temples and thus was inevitably introduced to Ramayana. The writer was drawn to antagonist Ravana and his race the Asuras. This idea stayed in Neelakantan for many years, resurfacing in discussions with relatives at family gatherings. Even as the writer married, moved to Bangalore and raised his two kids, the yearning to tell Ravana's story did not diminish. This was how Asura came into being, the debut novel of the writer that tells a story from the point of view of the defeated king Ravana. The panel discussion topic would be mythology through the lens of art forms, dance and literature. And the discussion will be moderated by our esteemed president and director who needs no introduction, Mr. Professor Nagesh Rao. Please give a big hand.
Over to us.
Yes. Mallika, you want to get us started?
I don't know. She just said I should start, so. You want to start?
No, please.
No, please.
Yeah.
Don't be patronizing. Ladies first, indeed.
So we'll have Mallika start, and then we'll have you going after that.
One day, a one-eyed monkey came into the forest. She saw a woman meditating furiously. The one-eyed monkey recognized the woman ascetic. She was the wife of an even more famous Brahmin. To watch her better, the one-eyed monkey climbed onto a tree. Just then, with a loud bang, the heavens opened, and Indra jumped into the clearing. Indra saw the woman ascetic. The woman paid him no heed. Indra, attracted, threw her onto the floor and proceeded to rape her. Then Indra disappeared. And the woman's husband, the ascetic, the Brahmin ascetic, arrived. He saw at once what had transpired. So he called upon Vishnu so that he may get justice. So Vishnu arrived. Are there any witnesses? So the Brahmin said, just the one-eyed monkey. Now, the one-eyed monkey really wanted for this woman to get justice. So she retold the events exactly as they had happened. Vishnu gave his judgment. Indra has sinned in that he has sinned against a Brahmin. May he be called to wash away his sins. So Indra arrived and performed the Ashwamedha Yajna. So it transpired that a horse got killed. A god got sin-free. A Brahmin's ego was appeased. A woman was ruined. And a one-eyed monkey was left thoroughly confused by what human beings call justice. Would you say history has changed in the last 3,000 years? Thank you, Mike. So, mythology and stories are an amazing soil that we have, an amazing cache. But we must understand that there are certain prisms through which mythology has been interpreted, told, performed, understood. And there are basically two prisms. One is the prism of patriarchy, of which I'm going to talk. The other is the prism of the upper castes and the Sanskritized castes, which my friend will talk about, because he is talking about Ravana. Look at the women that have come through to us. Savitri, Sati Savitri. Hundreds of women were killed on their husband's funeral pyres because of the interpretation of Sati. Now, you know, basically you know the story, right? She falls in love with, she's the daughter of a very famous king, and she falls in love with this man in the forest, discovers that he is the son of a banished blind king. And as soon as she falls in love, she is told, don't marry him, because 1 year from the day you get married, he will die. And she said, I will deal with it then. So she goes into the forest and she starts living with Satyavan. And she makes a mound of 365 grains of rice to mark the passing of time. And they're extremely happy. And finally she comes to the last grain. And she persuades Satyavan that day to let her come into the forest where he's chopping wood. And she watches and waits for signs. And suddenly he says he's feeling very tired and lies down. And suddenly she feels everything changing. And then there is this conversation with Yama. The way it comes down to us is that Savitri refused to live if her husband died. And therefore, if you're a woman, beta Savitri jaise banna, meaning kill yourself if your husband dies, because there's no life after that. But is that the conversation she had with Yama? She says, Yama, when did you come? How did I not know you? Aren't you supposed to be cold? Satyavan's head is still warm in my hands. Don't go, Yama. I have no fear of your path. I shall follow you. Who are you? Yes, I know you are destiny. But what is destiny? Who decides whom you should take? Who decides that Satyavan's young life must come to an end here? And then she says, Yama, you are kind. You grant me a boon. You call me a chaste and a virtuous wife, and you grant me a boon. Anything I want except Satyavan's life. Grant my father-in-law his sight, so that he may see the plight of this world. And Yama continues, and she chases him again and says, stop, Yama. I am not going to leave you. I will follow you through whichever hells you want. Who are you? Yes, I know you are death. But are you a part of life? Are you a part of life like I am a part of life? And where do you take your victims? Where will you take Satyavan? Stop, I will not go back. And Yama again turns and she says, Yama, you call me a chaste and a virtuous wife and grant me a second boon. Anything I want except Satyavan's life. Grant then my father-in-law his kingdom, so that he may rule over a united world. And again Yama goes, and again she chases him and says, Yama, stop. Can you only destroy or can you create? Look at me, I'm a woman. I can destroy and I can create. Am I not then greater than you? No, Yama, I will not return. I will not return. And again Yama turns to her and says, you are great, Yama. You give me a third boon. You call me a chaste and a virtuous wife. Anything I want except Satyavan's life. Grant me then 100 children, so that by them I may remember Satyavan. And Yama grants it. She says, stop. You have called me a chaste and a virtuous wife, and you have promised me 100 children. If you take Satyavan away, how does that come true? And Yama defeated, hands Satyavan back. And my Savitri says, hundreds of women have burnt on their funeral pyres in my name. Every woman is asked to be like me, Sati. Women fast in my name, and husbands wish for their wives to be like me. All lies. I am not a Sati because I refuse to live. I am a Sati because I challenged death. I am a Sati because I insisted I bring Satyavan back, and I am a Sati because I won. But think of what has happened in the name of Sati. Think of what we do in the name of Sati. I mean, as recently as a few years ago, a woman in Rajasthan was burnt on her funeral pyre, on her husband's funeral pyre. So what is it that has made for this complete transformation of these figures? How do we know that Sita was okay with the way she was treated? So I started in my career looking at mythological figures and seeing whose perspective was their stories coming out from. So the first time I worked with Sita. Beta Sita jaisi hona. And it was in a piece of mine called Sita's Daughters in 1990. And I started looking, you know, there are more than 300 versions of the Ramayana. We are told the most sexist, the most upper class one. So I started looking at a lot of these Ramayanas. And Sita comes out to be a very different woman from this completely whitewashed, boring woman that we are told she is. She challenges, she demands. So I rewrote the Ramayana from Sita's perspective. And I was just sharing with both of them. My Sita says to Rama, Rama, if you say you are a god, then you are omniscient and omnipresent. Then you knew that that deer was a Rakshasa. You knew that it was Ravana dressed as a sadhu who came to get me. You knew I would be abducted. So what motive did you have of letting that happen? Is it because you feel that you are insecure as a man? Is it because you wanted to be the greatest king? Is it because you wanted everybody to call you the greatest leader? Shame, Rama, shame. And she says, Mother Earth, take me back. This story is not my story. This story is a weak man's story. My mistake was that I took part in a weak man's story. So take me back. And when she's thrown out by the on the Dhobi story, she says, Rama, I'm so happy to be free of you, because now I can bring up my two sons to be secure and trusting men. I have to tell you that Vishwa Hindu Parishad used to continuously try and attack the theatres where I was performing. But we have been brainwashed. And our amazing women characters have been pressed into black and white cutouts by the way they have been interpreted. And we take it. And much of the violence that goes on today against women is a direct fallback from this. Because from the beginning, every girl is told, whatever family she comes from, she is told to behave in a certain way. To not do this because it's not becoming. And so on and so forth. And our mythology is cited constantly. The BJP and the RSS continuously misquote our mythology. Why is it that when the whole debate on Babri Masjid was going on, the only place they could find which they could assign to Sita was her kitchen? That was the only thing. Sita ki Baudi. That was the only thing they found. Everything else was Rama's pot and Rama's this and Rama's that. The Sita was assigned this. The only woman who has completely escaped this two-dimensionality is Draupadi. Because they just couldn't fit her. And as a result, she's never been made into a goddess. Because she was too inconvenient. You couldn't do it. So one of the pieces I also do is actually based on a poem. Some of you probably know that I worked for 5 years on Peter Brook's Mahabharata, which is considered one of the greatest productions of the 20th century. It was a 12-hour production. We were people from 22 different countries. I was the only Indian in it. And in many senses, that experience of playing Draupadi for 5 years is what transformed me into the kind of performer I am today. Because I thought, if one character can touch so many, and my interpretation of that character, can touch so many women across the world, from sort of trendy Sorbonne graduates to big, fat, black women in Harlem to Aboriginal women in Australia. You know, it didn't matter what, but people would come up to me and say, that makes sense to us. The kind of feminism that is being spoken about in America doesn't make sense to us. But that kind, and why is it that that kind of woman being told to us when we are told Indian stories is also always about meek women? So, when we were doing this production, my brother, who is an environmentalist, saw this all-night 12-hour performance and sat down in the morning and wrote a poem in Gujarati called Mu Draupadi, which I translated into English, and I use it in several of my shows. I've done a show called In Search of the Goddess, which is doing exactly what I'm doing just now, which is really looking at mythological figures. And Draupadi, after, for instance, after she has been disrobed and she's sitting there and she's going around the court saying, you know, what of me? How can Yudhishthira play me? And she says, I, unrobed, was dragged into that court of men. What kind of husbands these that are tied by a dharma of lies? And I asked, what of me? What of me? And Bhishma replied, power is truth, dharma, darkness. Limitlessly robed, I was clothed by God. Yes, Krishna gave me cloth, but where was the Gita's truth? Was Arjuna not in need of that then? And if you look at it, it's true. Krishna was also playing a game. He could have stopped it. That is where the first Dharma Bhanga happened. And he should have preached the Gita there. But he took another 14 years before he preached it because of this whole theory that all evil had to be destroyed and a new world created and so on. But it's worth constantly asking whether it's mythological women or whether it's women you read about in the newspapers every day. What is her story? Not history, but her story. What was she thinking? How would she interpret a story? What is her point? But we always have, even the women journalists are thinking with a male paradigm in their heads. Like women politicians think in male. Because we are manipulated. As a society, we are manipulated. And it's the same images that keep coming back over and over and over again to us. And that is why, as communicators, we need to change things. We need to see that these are not the messages going out. We need to see that the messages we are sending out actually change something fundamental. I'll just give you one last example and then have you listen to Ravana. You know Gandhiji's three monkeys. bandariyas, not bandars, because the bandars didn't do anything, just sat like that, 60 years. So the bandariyas say, look with wide open eyes at all the violence that is being committed. Listen to all the ways language is used to denigrate women, and then shout it out loud and warn people to change. So those are our 3 bandariyas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malika. This is wonderful and amazing. And I was mentioning to them that my father is a photographer and an artist. And growing up at home, he would often ask us and others around him, what's the most important part of this photograph? And of course, as kids and others who look at the photograph, immediately would point to a person or a tree or a mountain or something. Then very quietly he would say, the most important part of the photograph is what's just outside the photograph. And the most important part of the photographer and the story is what he or she cropped out. Right? That all stories are partial. And that all stories have a vantage point that privileges certain political stances, it privileges certain points of power, and it privileges our sense of what is right and wrong in very realistic ways. So as Malika so beautifully now portrayed, right? We are creating a space because through mythology and stories are the ways we can begin engaging in difficult conversations. Because it's very easy to put it under the rug or have a superficial conversation or have no conversation at all. Right? It's difficult to talk about rape. It's difficult to talk about power and domestic abuse and violence and so on. And here we have ways to do it. And now we have Anand Neelakantan. I am fascinated, and I apologize to him that I have not read the book yet. But the fact that again we have a vantage point that's very different from normally what we think of Ramayana, and especially of Ravan. Again, in terms of, in fact, I'm reading the reviews, at least this notion that Rama won and Ravan lost is also a story being told in a certain way. So I'll invite Mr. Anand Neelakantan to share his perspective, how it got started, and more about the book, and then we'll open it up for conversation and dialogue.
Thank you, everyone. It was a spectacular performance from a spectacular artist. I will just start. See, I had done around 6 years research for doing this story. I was born and brought up in a very orthodox Brahmin family where only one side of the story was told. As a part of the research, I was traveling a lot, I was meeting a lot of people, and I came to know there are various versions of Ramayana. One of the most interesting version, which I think if it is published, definitely Vishendra Parishad also will be afterwards. But it is a very old tribal version which is in the Wayanad district of Kerala. Among the tribal there is a kind of Ramayana. I don't know how many would have heard it. In this it is a different Sita altogether. I will start with that. In this story, I have not used it, I have used certain elements of it. But this is a very interesting story in the sense that Sita is a tribal woman in the Wayanad hills. The story goes like that. It's a song actually. Hearing about her beauty, she is a very beautiful woman, lovely woman. Hearing about her beauty, one king from the north and one king from the south comes to woo her. The king from the south is of course Ravana. He comes from Sri Lanka all the way. Ravana, and the king from the north is Rama. So one person is, the song goes like that, the one person is very saintly, he talks always about dharma and other things. Other person is very spectacular. He has got a lot of money, very rich. So what happens? Sita's father calls Janaka is a tribal king in Wayanad. So he calls her and asks, who do you want to marry? She says, Father, I cannot decide. Both looks good. I don't know who will do that. The song goes on like that. Then it keeps on describing the virtues of both the person. Remember, this is a tribal version. This is not a Brahminical version which is told in the story. It's a tribal version, the tribal song in the old Tamil mixed Malayalam. It keeps on singing the praises of both Rama and Ravana. Here both are equal. So what happens? Sita says, Ravana finally one day, Ravana finds a way. He says that you are just listening to rumors. I have built a great city in Lanka, so prosperous. You please come and stay there. Don't come to my palace. You be in the garden. But see what I have done. How I am ruling. I am a great ruler. So she goes with Ravana voluntarily. With the condition that you will not touch me. And Ravana agrees. I will not touch you. I will treat you with all respect. She goes there and stays there. Rama hears about it. He is very angry. He thinks that Sita has cheated me. She has jilted. She was neutral all around. Now she has gone with Ravana. So he goes with the army. Then again, every day Rama and Ravan goes to Sita and asks, Lady, have you decided? Like most ladies, she says no.
I will not allow some sexist comments. You cannot generalize about women. Period.
This lady says that, agreed man. This particular lady, which is her characteristic, she says that I am ready to decide. Then they decide, we will fight a war. Whoever wins, they will get the lady. So lady also is amused. This lady is amused. So what happens is, they start fighting the war. Finally it becomes like all wars that I can control.
Yes.
Like all wars, this becomes bloody, deadly war. A lot of people start dying. The story goes like that because of then finally Lakshman and Vibhishan hatch a plot. This keep on going. This we cannot allow. And then the story is the usual story where because of presence of Vibhishan, Rama kills Ravana. Then comes the change. Sita refuses to go with Rama, saying that you have not used Dharma to kill Ravana. This is one version of the story which is not, the story ends there. And there are places in these tribal villages where they call Sita Kund, where Sita has taken bath, where Sita has taken like that. The point I am making is, we have been hearing only one Sanskritized, sanitized version of the story. There are lots and lots of variation of Ramayana. Now, I will come to another this thing. Mythology also. What ma'am has told is one side. My other part, let me tell you regarding Draupadi she was telling. There is another, now I am writing my second book, and in this hero, of course, is Duryodhana. From Duryodhana's angle.
Very good man. He was an
So I will just tell an incident in Mahabharata, which of course many will be aware. Karna was Duryodhana's best friend. One day, Bhanumati is Duryodhana's wife. One day, Bhanumati and Karna were playing a game of chess. Duryodhana was outside. During something she tried to cheat. Then immediately he grabs her. Karna grabs her in a friendly way, he grabs her. And a string of pearls were there on her waist. It breaks down. At that moment, Duryodhana enters the chamber. Karna is shocked. He didn't mean anything, but this is something which anybody might feel suspicious about it. And the wife also is shocked, she doesn't know what to say. At that time, Duryodhana says, shall I string the pearls or will you do that? He says, I believe, I trust you. I trust the wife and I trust my friend. This is another angle of a villain who has been painted in the blackest of black colors. Coming to Ravana. I don't know how many of you have heard about one of the most notorious of rapes. There is a rape in Ramayana. It is not told in any sanitized version. But in Valmiki Ramayana also it is there. Many of the temple retelling, it is glozed over. Ravana's wife Mandodari, Valmiki Ramayana talks about Mandodari being molested by Angada. Whereas many versions of the Ramayana, Angada raped Mandodari. In the sanitized version, how they tell it is, Ravana was conducting some puja, some yaga, after which he will become invincible. So there was no other way. So the easiest way is to attack the woman. So Angada was sent. Angada dragged Mandodari by her hair.
That hasn't changed, has it?
That doesn't change.
That the woman is attacked because of
And now, the main difference comes here. One of the words which I used in my story is this Bharatavarsha, one chapter starts like that. Doesn't lack gods. It has 33 crore gods. What it lacks is men. And I will be that man. Ravana says this when he was advised by his people to go and surrender. I will stand with my people. I will stand with my wife. There was no Agni Pariksha for Mandodari. So our epics talk about such men also, who we have tried to glorify. That was a choice which was perhaps made by us or perhaps it was thrust on us. That is one thing. Coming to the other part. See, all these, whatever ma'am had told, all these are, I am not trying to bring a divide, I am just analyzing this. All these are part of the Vaishnavite tradition. In Vaishnavite tradition, if you see, all, whether it is Ramayana, Mahabharata, this kind of, all kind of objectionable references might be there. But if you take Shaivite traditions, which is also a part of our tradition, the concept itself changed. You see how is Vishnu portrayed? He is lying, Aram says he is lying down on a serpent. Ananta and Lakshmi Devi, the goddess of wealth, is sitting at his feet. It shows something. It shows how the tradition treats women. I don't know how many have given a thought on that. It is just a god and goddess. We pray. We pray. I'll come to that part. Whereas Shiva's tradition, if you see, it is Ardhanarishara. So it is the same epic, same mythology, same country, which has produced both. What we choose is our choice. In Ardhanarishara concept, I don't know whether there is any other such a beautiful concept. And if you take Shiva's concept itself, the entire thing, he is not a god. See, don't think I am siding one god and other things. I am not playing politics with God. I'm just doing an analysis here. In Shiva's case, he is an ascetic. He is a god who lives on the earth. All other gods are somewhere, sitting somewhere up in the skies and looking down upon us. Shiva is one god. All cultures, all civilizations have produced gods, but I don't think any culture has produced a concept like this, where a god is half man and half woman. Where in the concept of God itself, see Shiva's family. I'll put it in very Russian language. He wears a snake he has a bull as his vehicle. His wife has a tiger as a vehicle. He is called what? He is called Pashupati. He is the god of all living things, not only men, not only for one caste. He is the god of all living things. Then his son Kartikeya, he has a peacock, and Ganesha has ram. You see, all these are part of a food chain. All these live together. Man, woman, beast, everything live. That's a harmony. It symbolizes that. Again, that's what I am telling. It is up to us what we take from mythology. It has got good and bad. But unfortunately, the traditions which have been thrust upon us is something different. There is nothing wrong with our tradition. What we are choosing, the heroes which we choose, that is our fault, not the fault. Their stories have come as such. This is one country, even though some parts have been modified, the other also still remains. I will stop this with one or two examples. See, in Madurai, near Madurai temple, there is a statue of E.V. Periyasamy Naikar. It says there is no God, no God, no God. The person who believes in a God is a fool. This is in front of one of the holiest of Indian. Sitting below that, people sell garlands which can be given as offering to the God. Actually, I think this glorifies, this is what our country is. Here we have got place for Periyar Ramaswamy Naikar, we have got place for Ravana, we have got place for Rama. The choice is given to us. What we choose is ours. Imagine the same thing. Just imagine for all with all apologies to everybody, to secularists, to BHP, to everyone. Imagine the same thing happening. Let us think with a neutral mind. Imagine somebody writing this in front of Vatican. Imagine somebody writing this in front of Makkah. I am not telling anybody should do that or foolish enough to do that. Indian mind has the capability to accept the opposites. You can call it strength, you can call it weakness. But there is nothing wrong with what we have. Savitri's story, we have interpreted it wrongly. What she is telling, that is exactly the way it happened. But we are interpreting it wrongly because it is so convenient for us. It is so convenient, it becomes a tool. We are using it as a tool to oppress women. In Ramayana itself, both examples are there. A Rama who asks for Agni Pariksha of Sita, and a Ravana who stands by his wife. Rama asks just on the basis of some rumor. Ravana refuses to have any kind of Pariksha when he is for sure that this has happened. So both heroes are the same mythology tells. Valmiki doesn't, or anybody, the person who has written, he has not. But what happens is ours is an oral tradition. Hardly any people read. So what happens is the person who tells the story, he chooses as per his convenience. I will end my long-winded speech with one small example. One of the concepts, another thing which has been, it has got nothing to do with women. One of the concepts which has been closed over altogether, but in my childhood I have heard. And now they are not talking about it in the same retelling. Why? Because it has become politically incorrect. That is the killing of Shambhuga. In Ramayana, I have written it in a different way in my book, if somebody has read the book. But in actual Ramayana, how it goes is, some Brahmins come to Rama and say that there is a drought. There is no rain falling. And Rama has called all astrologers. They come, they sit, they find that why the rain has not come? One Shudra is performing a tapasya. So he goes in search of the Shudra and finds Shambhuga. And he asks him, why are you doing this? And he says that I want to gain moksha. I want to become Indra. And on the insistence of the priest, Rama beheads Shambhuga. This was told, see, in many of the retellings in our house, As I said, I belong to a very orthodox Brahmin family. So mostly audience were from the same community. So sometimes it used to be told as to justify caste system. See, even Lord Rama has done that. And many of the youngsters at that time used to question it. Now it has become politically incorrect. So in Ramananda Sagar's Ramayana, it is not shown. People are there with plastic signs, glittering this thing and shooting arrows. Shooting arrows to the sky, like Diwali, the war is known as Diwali sky. So it becomes that kind of Ramayana we get used to. But the story, there is no difference, there is nothing, everything is told in the story. The mythology, our country has a long tradition of free thought. So we should be proud of the fact that in other countries there has been the church. They have suppressed the other voices. Here all the voices are there. Some may be feeble, some may be strong, but the voices are still there. It is up to us to pick it up and give voice, give strength to the feeble voice. I end with this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anand. It is true because apart from the stories that we hear, we're also privileging some stories over others. And I think it takes a lot of courage to tell the other story, the other perspectives. And the other story, as you said, is not to say that this is the true story, but just to say there is another story. And when you first hear, actually at Lanka, I watched Chimamanda Adichie's TED clip on the danger of a single story. And what comes to mind is the fact again that how can we have dialogue if some of us think that only one story is correct? We can only have multiple perspectives and other ways of looking at things if we can have those multiple stories. So let me turn it to the students who I'm sure are eager to ask questions or offer comments, and then we'll have some concluding thoughts from you in terms of conversations. So students, your thoughts, reflections, questions. Yeah.
As students of dance, especially Bharatanatyam, a lot of the padams and varnams that we are taught are based on mythological stories. Most of them involve us to embody female characters who are waiting for the husband to return home, especially something like Sakhi, which is taught to everyone. So I found it very difficult to understand what she felt like because I don't think I would have ever thought that way. I would pray to God if my husband or wife would come back home. So how to us and all the students who were learning with me felt that way, and our teacher was obviously very shocked. She's like, no, you have to understand bhakti bhava and something like that, which doesn't come naturally to us. So how do we get past that?
I have two comments on this. One is that actually I have three comments. One is that in the tradition of India, in all the bhakti movements and everything, male writers have consistently felt that the only people who know complete love is women. Because they actually, when they have a child, that is completely unalloyed love and that a man can never feel. So for instance, Siddhendra Yogi, who is considered the father of Kuchipudi, wrote as a woman, because he said, my love for Krishna, as a man I can never understand. So I will become that woman who is capable of complete love, and then I can understand what transcendental love is. So that was that tradition. I rebelled at these waiting women many years ago, and I have actually never done a waiting woman kind of thing. If you dig into the corpus of Tamil literature or Telugu literature, there are lots of feisty women. And I do a varnam, for instance, to Kartikeya, where she says, Kartikeya, if you think that you're suddenly going to break your promise to me and push off with somebody else, I have to tell you that all the love letters you have are with me in this box to which only I have the key. And I know the way to your father. So that's a very different kind of heroine. But so I 28 years old. He's a trained Bharatanatyam dancer. Went off to England to do a MA in creativity and performance, and called me one day and he said, you know, Ma, I've been asked to do a Bharatanatyam recital, but I find it very odd sitting here in the middle of all these immigration problems and so on, talking about the kind of songs you were talking about. So what should I do? So I sat up that night and I wrote in the complete tradition of a Varna, Pallavi, Anupallavi, Tali and everything, a new song for him in English. And the song goes like this. It says, "Oh Shiva, all my life I've been trying to be like you. I stand on one foot, I try and balance myself, but here I find myself in a foreign land. And somebody looks at me because I'm brown. When I came here, the customs officer looked at my passport and he said, why are you coming here? And then he said, all right. And he stamped it and he gave it back to me. And then I came onto the street and I couldn't go anywhere because the cars were coming from both sides. And then I went around looking for the address with my suitcase, and a policeman came and he said, what is it that you want? So I took it exactly as it was and recontextualized it. I also wrote a padam where it says, oh Krishna, the girl that I love who goes in a mini skirt and she wants to go to work all the time. And Krishna, I understand that women have the same ambitions as us, but can't you tell her to love me? I email, I Skype, and all I get is a message saying, sorry, I'm not home, call you back later. So please, Krishna, won't you ask her to love me a little bit more? Now, the point is and nobody can actually question my right to do this, because I have kept the structure in Pakka Kacheri style. So exactly as it is composed. That's how I composed it. Padam also I have composed exactly as it is. It's still to the gods, but the dancer's concerns are different. So in the Padam he also says, she has beautiful hair and now she's cut it. And I take her with me and we listen to music. And then I give her a glass of champagne and we drink it. I love her so much. It's the same vocabulary. The limitation is our own minds. We can write, I can write a song for you if you like. So, you have to keep all of this in mind. One, you can look for the literature that is there. Other is you can start writing, keeping within the alphabet of Bharatanatyam. And the third is you can think of it not as a sexist, but as a bhakti point of view. my one disagreement with Anand is perhaps that he said that this space exists for everything and it's opposite, and I think, Anand, it's shrinking. Our tolerance of difference, our tolerance for plurality, I mean, look at what is happening with Rushdie, look at what is happening with Vishwarupa, look at what is happening with James Lang book. I mean, it's constant. It's constant. And we have to be very concerned if this space shrinks, because then we are really in for a unipolar, very upper caste, very masculine world. And I think as communicators, all of us need to be thinking of these things constantly as we create communication. What is it that is being communicated?
And if I could add to what Malika is saying, I mean, the British have used it beautifully all over the world in terms of divide and rule by creating dualism. And for people in power, who are the storytellers in power, dualism is best because then I can really pitch one against the other. So I am with Malika, the multiplicity of voices that we need are absolutely critical. It's only getting more, I think, narrower and bigger. And as Anand was saying, I think it's also the role of the storyteller to be reflexive and conscious of the story that she or he is telling. Very quickly, if I can share, because I think part of the oral tradition, he said, and that's true for the literary tradition too. I grew up with a grandmother who was a rebel, right? So I've shared this with some of the students. My memory of storytelling is, I take you to Madras, you have a little place next to the ocean, think of a full moon night, right? Lots of mango trees and coconut trees around us. There is my auntie with 17 of us grandkids sitting around her, and you have Bismillah Bath, I'm originally from Bangalore. She takes a handful and gives it to Malika. The grandkids are about, ages 4 to about 16, 17. And she starts telling a story from Ramayana and Mahabharata. But here's the thing, children, if you allow them to be, will not be quiet, right? So as she's telling the story and it comes to Anand, who's 60 years old, Anand, my cousin, says, Aji! So Aji stops and says, what? Guess what happened at school today? So Aji says, what happened at school today? So Anand says, I opened my lunchbox and an eagle came and took my idlis away. And of course, Aji's like, whoa, that's amazing. And all the other grandkids are, there are no eagles, you're lying, in Madras there are no eagles, right? But without blinking an eyelid, my grandmother would include the idlis and eagles in the story. So whatever you were going through that day, your pain, heartbreak, math problems, and so on, she felt, which is what we're talking about, that the story can be relevant only if it's relevant to you. Whether you're 3 years old, 16 years old, 17 years old. So we never had the same story. And what my grandmother did was not, educated, right? There are multiple forms of storytelling. Today we call it participatory theatre. It's Terukuthu or any other form all over the world. Is an interaction, taking the dance form, if you will, as Malika so beautifully said, and make it appropriate for the audience. Connect with them, engage with them in ways that are relevant. So I agree, it's a really important thing to do. But back to courage. I would say both of them have immense courage to do what they're doing. And the issue is many of us shy away because we don't have the courage to stand up and say, this is a voice that needs to. Other comments?
I don't know much, it's not a question. It's like I read Ramcharitmanas by Goswami Tulsidas ji, okay? So in order to understand it. So after I read it, as Sir said right now, that there's the same Shiva who's there, who's a devotee of Lord Ram, as it is portrayed and as what I have gained from my grandparents. The same Rama stands there, who's an ideal king, but he is also an ideal husband. Okay, once he sends his wife to the exile, he does not remarry because he has all the rights to remarry. He does not remarry. He sleeps on the floor because he knows somewhere she is also doing the same thing. So I don't know, I've not seen all the versions of Ramayana, or I've not seen the different versions which are there. But my question is, which way to follow? Because the same Rama who's there, he at the end, when we go to Satwa Khand of Ramcharitmanas, like that's Uttarakhand, he says the same thing to all his devotees and the principals who are sitting there. I don't ask you to follow me. He says this thing. I don't ask you to condemn those who don't follow me. But if you have trust in me, then follow. So why don't you think it's we who keeps on telling that you should follow this, because that person never says that follow me, or if you don't follow this thing will happen. So it is not the person who's narrating the story is creating all these doubts in our mind, and not the, because most of us have not read the book. Okay, so what we are commenting is what we have been told. So when we go through inside the book, we go through the verses, we realize it's not being told. So that's the whole doubt is which way to follow, because he respects Ravana equally as he respects the Lakshman. So which way to go? That's my whole point.
See, no story is free of the storyteller. It is the storyteller, as you said, it is the storyteller who gives meaning to the what the audience wants to hear. He gives a meaning to that. I have read about that, and another. I will tell you one more story in Telugu. I have read in translation because I cannot understand Telugu. One of the folk tales talks about Rama complaining to Sita, saying that you have got time for my mother, you have time for everybody, you don't have, just like any other husband, you don't have time for me. It humanizes Rama and Sita to that extent. There is no deification there. Here, in what you said, Rama, if you see this in Asian Age, I have written a cover story about the viewpoint of Rama and Ravana. What I was arguing in that was, Ravana lived for what he believed was right. Rama lived for what others believed was right. So here, Rama, if he lies down, he knows that Sita is suffering, he loves Sita so much. Why did he send her out? Because he thought that the orthodoxy, the priest class will condemn him. He wanted to be an ideal god. He wanted to be an ideal man. Whereas, in the same circumstances, that is where I was bringing the contrast. Same circumstances, Ravana knows in a society which respects barriers, where honor of man was linked to how he protects women. Even in that society, when he is a king and his queen has been dragged by the people who have been called as monkeys, who have been dragged, still he stands by his wife. Because he believes that what I believe is right and I will stand for that. Whereas Rama, in spite of knowing that his wife is pure, he wants to prove to the world that I am a great man. So he lived for what others believed it is right. So both stories are told in Ramayana. It is up to you and the storyteller to take what is required. So the same thing I had argued in one of the cover stories which I wrote for Asian Age for Dasara. Even I had gone to another extent, another way of looking at the entire story. Who won the war? Now if you take Rama lived by Ravana as a king, he came up from abject poverty, he won his way up, he found a big empire, he lived as a king, he fought as a king and he died as a king. And when he was living, he had all the luxuries in the world. Now take Rama. He was born with a silver spoon or a golden spoon, whichever way you want to say. One way of looking at it is he threw it away. 14 years he was in the forest. And his wife was abducted by a demon. He fought a war, brought the wife back, lost her. Wife went away. Very pedestrian way of telling this. It's another way of looking at it. His brother, who was always with him, he had to order his death because he didn't please some Brahmins. You might have known the story how Lakshmana had died. It is very symbolically told that he walked into the river, Sarayu. It's another way of telling he committed suicide. Or he was thrown into the river. Take away all the things like a very common man who is hearing the story for the first time. That's how you get a different perspective. And Rama finally committed. Rama also walked into the river. Finally. So now you analyze both the lives. Then in my childhood I used to ask my very pious father, Now what do you want? If you follow Rama, this is what you get. So who won? And every Dasra you burn Ravana. But ultimately we all think like Ravana. We want all the materialistic pleasure in the world. Rama is a convenient option to deify, keep him pure, nobody follows him. So ultimately you think also, Ravana's life philosophy has what more number of followers are there than Rama. So either way you argue.
I think it's also worth bringing to your attention that this so-called monkey army was in fact the North Indian Aryans looking at the Dravidians. So even there is this whole very upper caste North Indian view that they saw people who were darker and had curlier hair and they called them monkeys.
No, this will be turning your conventional thinking in head. Because we have been always trying to think this is a big tyaga, big sacrifice which Rama did. Now in our materialistic culture, in present day culture, you use common sense and see, you feel like it was all foolish. What Rama did was right. That entire life he lived like a king. And one more thing I'll tell you, I don't know whether you have read the book, I use a lot of folk options in which the reason of kidnapping Sita is because Ravan was the father of Sita.
In other versions, he's a brother as well in some of the versions.
So he's the father of Sita, and he thinks that if Shurpanaga, his own sister, she asked whether he can love me, and for what did she get in return? So Ravan thinks that how safe my daughter will be with this kind of barbarians. Picks her out. Why it cannot be like that? So that I use in the story. That their perspective changes. Who is right, who is wrong, everything gets blurred.
We heard the story also of Ma Durga and Bhairovji. The thing is, he did whatever he did because he also wanted moksha, and he realized that being beheaded by Ma Durga was the only way to attain moksha. So relating it to the story of Ram beheading the Shudra, this can also be looked at in such a way that since he wanted moksha, he was beheaded by a god. So that was his, that was God's way of answering his prayers, that he ultimately got moksha through that. The first thing is, I'm in favor of your point of view, but then that's my perception. The thing is, when we are telling a story, shouldn't it be perception free? Shouldn't it be told in a way that is open to questions? Because even the way in which we tell a story, I would tell from a feminist way, so I would support your view and probably, but then I'm also influencing other people's minds. Shouldn't it be in a neutral way?
There is nothing like neutrality. It doesn't exist.
Then
It only exists in a vacuum flask.
Is it not wrong that on our part to tell a story in such a way that we are also trying to influence people to join our line of thought?
Obviously that's true.
That's the whole purpose of writing the story.
Obviously.
No, but one thing we are questioning is that those people are trying to influence our thoughts in that way. Then who are we to say that this is only the correct?
Listen, when the caste system was born, there were perhaps reasons for the caste system being born. Today, from what we know from the civilizational point of view, I, for one, completely oppose the caste system. Does that mean that just because it's existed for 3,000 years, my questioning it is wrong? No. Today we know more about equality, we know more about human rights, we know more about, at least I hope we do. And therefore, you know what Gandhiji said, which was very interesting. Somebody said to him, but 20 days ago you said this and yesterday you contradicted it completely. And he said, yes, in these 20 days I have had enough information for me to contradict it. So if I'm contradictory, take my latest thing, not my earlier, because I'm constantly learning. Human beings have to constantly learn. Like for instance, I would go back to something, a lot of the language we use, and I brought it up when Anand was speaking, we don't even think that it is sexist, but it is sexist. The minute somebody brings it up, if you want not to be sexist, then you change it. But if you want to continue being sexist, you don't change it. But if it's not brought up that there is a different point of view, or you are doing something that is not right or is hurting somebody's feelings, then whether you change or not is yours. But it is the storyteller's role to actually bring that to your notice.
Now, with standing in his shoes, he probably did not want to sound sexist.
Of course he didn't.
But
what I'm saying is,
you know, on a very smaller level, like, you know, if you're talking about a teenage boy, he probably could have a very naive view about this, that yeah, most girls would not make up their mind. You know, they would be very indecisive. So that could be his opinion about it.
it is what every little boy is told. Girls cannot make up their mind. Girls take longer to get dressed. Girls love to go shopping. This is part of the mythology of patriarchy. And many of us, I think we have to do deep introspection to understand where our prejudices are. Because we've also been brought up in families and societies and schools and colleges where we are constantly being given one point of view. So we need to go deep inside us to find out our prejudices about everything. We can have prejudice about, I mean, India is one of the most racist countries in the world. You can be cross-eyed, but as long as your skin is white, somebody will marry you. I mean, we have advertising for whitening vaginas, for God's sakes. So we have to understand where we are coming from, and it has to begin, especially as communicators, it has to begin with deep introspection, checking my own language, checking my points of view and saying, is this correct or is this something that I have absorbed like a sponge and I've never thought about it?
Like she mentioned about certain dance forms, I don't know much, but yeah, I've seen such dances being performed. Like relating it to something like Karwa Chauth. You know, this is a tradition that you are told you have to follow. But in certain cases, I don't say it will happen in the majority of cases, but in certain cases, it may so happen that you feel that amount of love when you're doing it. I mean, if I'm fasting the whole day for my husband.
So husbands never feel love because they never fast in the Indian tradition.
My family, for my mother, it wasn't exactly the compulsion that she has to do it. But since the time I have grown up, I've seen my father, despite being a diabetic, he fasts with her wherever my mother is not.
Please clap for our father. Your father is one of the very rare people. That's all. I will give a very simple 1 second example of how we pick up symbols and we absolutely do not think of what it means. Okay? Kyonki Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahu Thi started this fashion of putting a tika here to say, I am this man's belonging. Okay? Today in Kerala, every second woman does this. And when I stop them and I say, you know, what does this mean? It means that you have a dog collar. Oh, but I love my husband. So I said, does he not love you? Does he have any sign to say that he belongs to you? Do you understand what you are saying? No, it's just fashion. So I said, but then understand that it is oppressive fashion, and then if you want to do it, do it. But understand that what you are giving out as a message. You are giving out the fact that I have a dog collar on. Why does a woman wear a mangalsutra and a man wears nothing? Why? Why do we have to advertise that we belong? Because we are slavish. Why do we have to change our names? Because we are slavish. We want not to be noticed. We want to be this. Have we ever actually asked ourselves, if a woman, knowing that Karwa Chauth is a completely repressional way that a man proves his own power, still wants to do it, let her do it. But the point is she doing it with the knowledge, or is she just doing it because it's tradition? There are lots of really, really repressive and regressive traditions that need to be thrown out. Not all tradition is good. As he said, there are stories which have things that are good from our point of view, from a 21st century point of view. I mean, I meet Brahmins who say we genuinely are superior.
Coming from, I would like to clarify that Shiva used to perform, used to fast along with his wife. Like he used to fast for.
I know, but I ain't seen many Shivas around here.
That's the thing.
But that's the interesting thing, that you know, Hinduism is the only one of the 5 great religions where women and men came together and women didn't come out of anybody's rib. So in fact, if there is a chance in hell of an egalitarian society, it should come out of Hinduism, because Shiva without Shakti is Shava. And we know scientifically that we have both X and Y chromosomes. So it's the closest to the Ardhanarishwara proof scientifically. So I agree with you. I'm just talking of what we do now.
Ma'am, but don't you think this is all very foreign to us? Like if we go back to the Purathan Vedic religion, we have like the male form like Vishnu and the Ardhanari like Shiv. Then we have Shakti, which is completely a female-dominated system. So like all this bhakti and everything, this is all very alien to our actual, like to the cusp of our religion or the root of our religion. Don't you agree with that? That this is all it's all coming out. It's all foreign. Like God started to influence during the Gupta period.
What is foreign in India is a strange concept, because somebody from Nagaland would not agree with you at all. That's a very middle India Hindu stand that you are taking.
Why? Like Nagaland people.
Adivasis don't have either Shiva or Vishnu. They have trees, they have rivers, they have plants as their deities.
Yeah, it's different for them. Like what I'm saying is.
So what I'm saying is, what is the us and them that makes you more Indian?
No, I'm not saying Indian in that respect.
You're saying foreign. So what is foreign?
I will
We are all, any of us who have any Aryan blood are all foreigners here.
Agreed.
So,
Agreed. What? Let us use. Okay, I will use the term Hindu now. In that respect, I would like to say that all these influences, these super dominant male influences that have come, these are all very much foreign to us. And
Manu Smriti was not foreign. Manu Smriti was born out of the Brahminical tradition. And the Brahminical tradition is a Hindu tradition.
Mama, that's disputed. That those lines in Manu Smriti which say that lower castes and dogs and drums and everything needs to be beaten and
No,
all that.
Manu Smriti also says that a woman's existence is limited to the relationship she has with a man. She can only be a sister, a mother, a daughter. Otherwise, she has no existence.
But it comes post the Vedic period. Manu Smriti is post Vedic period.
Yeah, you and I can go into this long religious discourse, but maybe you want to comment on that?
No, what I say is what we consider as tradition. Traditions change. See, again I am telling, I don't know, in my home state has changed for worse.
Yes, absolutely, I agree.
Now the tradition earlier, it was a totally woman-oriented society. Even the king's son, he never used to inherit. It was his sister's son, or no son is the sister. There were a lot of queens ruling Kerala at that time, Travancore and Cochin. And Malabar, by that time they had gone British, they were ruling there. And in my childhood I have seen 75, 80-year-old woman addressing when the husband tries to address them with the singular, that me, that like tu or tum, I have seen them shouting at their husband. How dare you address a woman like that?
I've also seen it in my family. Absolutely.
How dare you address a woman as singular? You have to use the equivalent of art. From there, now that was a tradition. Means, how was the divorce in two of the major prominent community? The divorce was so easy. I don't think anywhere in the world it was like that. The wife has to just roll the mattress and put it out. Husband is out. many of men
Don't even know what
it will be a nightmare to have something like that now.
But also I think I think it's important, okay, we're talking about tradition, but also think about, I think we're talking about the day-to-day events in terms of how we are living our lives today, and if we reflect on it, right? So simple thing, most business schools in India have this, group discussion thing, that they have as a part of the interview process, right? And let's say in a typical group, it tends to be about 6 or 7 men and 3 or 4 women. What happens? What happens in that 45 minutes? Right? Where is the respect and reflexivity in terms of other voices and so on? But there's a belief that actually the men feel like by screaming and shouting and so on, one, I'm showing my power, I'm showing my intelligence, I'm showing I'm capable, I can lead, etc., 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 and so on. Right? So to connect it back to our day-to-day events to see how it plays out, and I think both of them are saying, we're not even aware of it. Right? Even if I jokingly in a class say that men are better, superior than women, all the men say, yo.
I mean, it's not a joke. So I saw a couple of that. Yeah.
Fortunately or unfortunately, we live in a time when most artifacts of collective consciousness have been used to generate political agenda. And when we and you as communicators try and change that, how do you start? Do you start by delinking, or do you start by changing, what you have as an independent artifact and the politics that are associated with it? How do you change this relationship? Where do you start?
Yeah, I will talk about it. Well, I think what both of us are doing is doing that. We are planting something in the minds of our readers and viewers. So that even like 1 degree has changed. Just by what we have done, at the tiniest, 1 degree has changed. Even if it has irritated the heck out of you. Next time you come across, as I said earlier, the Ramayana or any of these stories, something in you is going to change. Okay? Even if it says they were both wrong, that's nonsense. At least you have re-evaluated it. And I think that's how we change. And I'm taking permission from both these lovely men to talk to you about something that we are doing to change this, which is we are doing this I'm saying we, not as Malika or Darpana, but we, the people of the city of Ahmedabad and the people of the world, are doing an event on Valentine's Day to get together young men and women to come together at the Gujarat Vidyapeeth Sports Complex, which is a big ground, to together say enough. We will not be quiet about violence against women. We will actively participate in the process of change. We will actively change our language. We will actively change the way things are. We will intervene. Why Valentine's Day? The reason it's Valentine's Day is because internationally, 70% of all abuse of women is in the hands of somebody who at some stage has said, I love you. Whether it's the father, whether it's the brother, whether it's a boyfriend, whether it's the friend of the family, it is always somebody. So Valentine's Day has become Violence Day, which is why it's been chosen. I'm going to ask two things of you. One is I've already asked Mr. Rao that Micah really needs to be there in big numbers. You are the communicators. I was speaking to NID yesterday and I said, you know, in the way you look at design, things need to change. In the way you communicate, in the way we draw advertisements, it has to change. And I was talking about this disgusting Subway ad, and I stopped eating Subway because I saw this ad. It's an print ad in Ahmedabad, and there's this woman holding a Subway sandwich, looking very lascivious, and it says you can cram all 7 inches into your mouth. We need to get together and sit outside Subway with placards. That's the kind of action that now needs to be taken if we want to change the society. So one is, it's at 5 o'clock at the Gujarat Vidyapeeth Sports Ground. We have had new songs written. We are going to dance. Why dance? Because when a woman is abused, the first thing that happens is her body closes up. If you're walking like this and somebody, you know that people are undressing you, the first thing you will do is walk like this. Yes, women? And dance is what liberates the body. That's why dance. And we've had some of Ahmedabad's most famous poets write new songs and new garbas. Why garba? Because garba is one of the few dance pieces where a man doesn't lead. Nobody leads. And what do we as women want? We don't want to be led. We don't want to lead either. We want partnerships. And we want togetherness. And we want our own space. So please come, talk to your other students. I would like 5 or 6 volunteers from amongst you who become our volunteers in MICA to see that Micans come. And secondly, I would request all of you who wish for a change in society to get up and take a pledge with me just now, that you will become active participants in this whole process of making the world a safer place for women. And I'm going to read out the pledge. And the symbol is this: I will be counted. I will be counted in this global war. And this is happening in 184 countries. So I would like you to raise your finger and to repeat after me. I pledge to always raise my voice I pledge to always raise my voice to stop violence against women. To stop violence against women. I will intervene. I will intervene whenever I see violence against women. Whenever I see violence against women. I will encourage discussions. I will encourage discussions on the ill effects of violence against women. On the ill effects of violence against women. I will educate others. I will educate others to stop verbal, physical, psychological abuse of women. To stop verbal, physical, psychological abuse of women. And I will rise. And I will rise. Thank you, and I hope to see you on the 14th so that together we can change the way the world is.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sarabhai. If anybody has any more questions, you can still ask.
Okay, maybe one last thought and comment.
Yeah, so in line with the last question that was asked about politics and how cultural artifacts have been used, so my question was not just restricted to mythology, but the idea of myth. So mythology was traditionally used in 1992 in the Ayodhya case, but it's created even in modern history. So even to keep a nation as diverse as India together, you have to demonize a nation like Pakistan. So or even during communal this thing. So and in the age of new media and breaking news are happening, so you get very less time on air. So basically jingoism works like anything. So everyone resorts to jingoism, and because it flares or attitudes like anything else, and no one really can listen to a logical argument. So in this case, what does one do as a, because this is very problematic.
You know, I think one of the problematic areas has been is that most of the, into quote, saner people believe in a participatory democratic process. So just to come to a conclusion takes much longer. And hate brings together instant responses which are unthought of. So the noise by the hate mongers is always much more. And one of our tasks as communicators is, how do you circumvent this? And how do you get the sane voices out there as fast, as quickly? Are there certain things on which, without the democratic process, we can agree? Are there some things that are non-negotiable? Because if there are, and I'm sure there are, I mean, I don't think that there is a single person here who will say to me, no, I think women and abuse should continue. At least I hope not. Then we can say that anybody, in the car coming here we were talking about how, if it's a woman politician, then the only thing that gets discussed is how bad she looks, how good she looks. Look, she has bags under her eyes, look at what she's wearing, look at what a mess she is. So we know the mindset. So can we say, for instance, that if anybody in the outer space is doing something that is anti-woman, that without negotiating with all these people, we can instantly respond and say, this is wrong. So these are processes that we need to work at together. To say that these are 4 things that are not negotiable. Human rights is something that we value. Equality of opportunity, equality of the right to exist is something that we value. And then on those points, we have to mount a strategy. I think we are so perplexed that we don't really mount a strategy, and the hate monger strategies are very much in place.
The concept of hate itself is alien to our culture. This is the only culture in the world which doesn't say the person who doesn't believe it will rot in hell. There is no concept of patriotism in our religion. We have always spoken about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The entire world, this is one culture which has worked for the entire world. It has a message for the entire world. It is ironical that with the name of such a religion which was so enlightened, that is used as a mirror image of what Taliban is doing. Now what is the difference?
Absolutely.
So as I was answering his question, whether our culture has degraded now, it is going down.
Or as this young woman was saying, who actually has read it? We pick up things from the newspaper. How many people have actually read Salman Rushdie's book before they condemn it? Or how many people have read X, Y, or Z? We never have the time or the inclination to actually check a fact. Correct? So it's all hearsay. I have a radio interview, so I will have to make this a last question.
I can ask you about that. So since we've been talking about duality of voices and acceptance of a point of view that isn't very popular or popular, so there's a performing artist by the name of Honey Singh who is
So we're just talking about him earlier.
who's very popular. I mean, he's popular for the wrong reasons, if I may say. I mean, the kind of lyrics and the kind of cultural.
Misogynist.
Yeah, he is. And the kind of cultural implications that he brings into his lyrics and his songs. So he's been banned in certain parts of the country. And Anurag Kashyap came out with a statement in the media saying, I know that he is crass, but his voice
he has a
also
right.
has a right to exist. So would you comment on this?
See, banning is not a solution. He is crass, it is for the society to reject him. If society keeps on accepting this kind of things, it reflects not on that person, it reflects on the society. If we are ready to take crap, we are taking a lot of crap from the politicians. Now we have started taking crap from the artists also.
And from films.
From films. But logically we cannot deny his right as long as, but once it becomes indecent, then the limit crosses. Once he crosses that limit, freedom of expression is not absolute. Freedom of expression is always relative. It doesn't mean that, see, I can talk, I can air views about neutral things. If I come and abuse your relatives and say it is my freedom of expression, it is almost like that. It crosses the border of decency. Then what Anurag Kashyap says doesn't make any sense.
I agree. I also think that we were talking of Honey Singh earlier because I write a column in DNA, and 3 weeks before the Delhi raid, I had written about how misogynist it is, and I said to people, we have to pressure the record company and him to understand what this is doing. So banning, as he said, doesn't work. So one reader picked up this and said, what can I do? And he wrote off to the Prime Minister, National Commission of Women. Of course, he didn't get an answer. And he filed a case in Chandigarh High Court saying that this needs to be examined. And that is the case, it's Chandigarh High Court that has banned it. But what I'm saying is, it's because the good people are quiet that all this happens. With social media, you can immediately start a pledge campaign, you can start a petition, and there are ways of actually stopping the marketing of this which are not banning it but putting so much pressure that you make them ashamed of it. You make them realize that we will not take this. I mean, that's the kind of thing we need to do, and need to do actively from now. Because the whole thing of women and some water being sold and some half-naked woman lying like this, hello? You know, but the point is not to try and get it banned. The point is to go and say, if 10,000 people say we will not use this product unless this advertisement goes off the air, that makes sense. And we have the tools. So that's really what we need to do. And Honey Singh's things go way beyond decency. Way beyond this. So it's not even like the Subway sandwich which says it but doesn't say it. He says it. He says, I'll rip off your panties and you'll say, Wah Badshah. And much worse. So I think we as communicators have a huge role to play. And we must take that responsibility and take it on seriously to break through these prejudices and change the world. Otherwise we are going towards a worse and worse scenario.
I think we'll stop at this point, and let's give them a big round of applause.
as something that you have to come to, and let's do it together. Thank you very much for being a very patient audience.
We'd like to thank Dr. Sarabhai and Mr. Neelkantan and Dr. Rao for a very enlightening and eye-opening session. And before we close the session, we'd like to give away small presents on behalf of migrants to both the speakers.
Martial arts training. There's a 2-hour module we've worked out for self-protection for the women of my town. So anytime you want, you just let us know. We'll change mindsets, but let's be safe for the moment.